you have a diagnostic agent, which is low radiation, and that basically we do imaging with PET-CT. And based on what the findings are, if they're positive on that, the imaging unit, which is low radiation, can be removed and replaced with therapeutic unit. And I almost call it like a homing signal, where the therapeutic unit follows all the sites of disease that are identified on the scanning with the diagnostic agent and treats all of those cancers much more specifically rather than like treating or damaging a lot of good tissues.
Well, welcome to the Oncology Insights Podcast, brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm Abby Benyo, dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussion in oncology. Get ready to expand your knowledge along with me and stay ahead with today's episode. So I'm Abby Benyo. I'm your host today. I'm an interventional pulmonologist at the University of Minnesota. And I have two guests with me today, Dr. Tony Abraham and Daniel Varghese. Dr. Abraham is a skilled and experienced nuclear medicine physician with fellowship training in PET-CT and nuclear oncology from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and 20 years of experience. His expertise encompasses all aspects of nuclear medicine and PET-CT, with a particular passion to targeted therapeutics to treat various cancers. He takes great pride in being in the forefront to bring therapeutics, including Pluvicto, to community settings to improve access so patients can be treated closer to home. He has multiple publications and has been an invited presenter several times to the Society of Nuclear Medicine and Molecular Imaging and the Radiological Society of North America. And Dr. Abraham also holds positions of leadership at local and national levels of the Society of Nuclear Medicine and Molecular Imaging. Daniel Varghese is a board-certified physician assistant and healthcare innovator with over 22 years of clinical and executive leadership experience. As CEO of RadiantPath Health, Incorporated, he leads the nation's first mobile cancer care unit, delivering advanced nuclear theranostics like Lutetium-177 PSMA therapy for prostate cancer. Daniel's background spans non-invasive cardiology, critical care, and mobile diagnostics, with prior leadership roles at Concierge Imaging, House MD, and multiple hospital systems. He is driven by a mission to make cutting-edge cancer care accessible to underserved communities, combining clinical excellence with operational innovation. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask you, how did you end up in this space? How did you end up in theranostics? Dr. Abraham, would you like to start off, please?
Absolutely. So in my background, as you mentioned, I've been in the nuclear medicine field for about 2 decades. And prior to that, I actually did internal medicine. So I enjoyed that interaction of not only imaging to diagnose a patient, but actually to take that to the next step, to actually treating a patient as well. So in the last 2 decades, there have been significant advances in terms of not just imaging, but in therapeutics also. So the goal here for us was to basically bring these theranostics to the local setting where the patients actually are, because typically they're the bastions of the hospitals. But as we know, most of the healthcare is actually carried out in the community, about 85% of it. So our goal was to bring these kind of care therapies to patients closer to their home instead of them having to travel to major academic centers, which might be often several hours away. And in terms of scheduling, that might be not always be feasible for them. And last thing you want is a patient who has metastasis to the bone to be sitting in a car traveling for 4 or 5, even 10 hours that I've heard in the past. So we wanted to alleviate that and also increase access to these therapies to patients wherever they might be, whether they be in major urban settings or even rural areas. And this way I'll segue into Daniel Varghese, who can actually kind of explain, from his synergistic background, how this works well with our overall arching goal.
About 2 years ago, when Dr. Abraham approached me with the idea of how can we democratize and bring this type of therapy out to the masses, because he's been doing it. He was the first physician to do this in a private setting in New York, and he wanted to bring this out to the communities. And he came up to me and asked me if there was a way that I can come up with, because of my past experiences in mobile cardiology and mobile nuclear cardiology and mobile diagnostics, if there's a way that I can formulate a plan, an idea, a pathway to bring this out to the communities. And I was a little bit of a shell shock because when I saw the prices of the drug as compared to what we're dealing with in cardiology, it was exponentially higher. And I had no background in oncology or in the oncology space other than what we learned in PA school. So it took me about 6 months to actually put the idea on paper, formulate a business plan that was viable. And then there was an aha moment of, yes, this can work. But we needed a lot of buy-ins, specifically from the Department of Health. So the very first hurdle was which Department of Health was going to give us the green light to provide mobile cancer care, mobile nuclear cancer care, because right now there was no mobile nuclear licenses where in any state that I know of at the time that allowed a practice to carry radioactive isotopes to regions, to communities, and treat them outside of a facility. So the very first buy-in was to get a Department of Health to partner with us to think outside the box. And we found that in Texas. So once we knew that that can happen and we had their buy-in, then everything else started to fall into place. So that brings us to now formally creating the company and moving forward.
Wow. So it sounds like you've really had to overcome a lot of obstacles. I'm thinking of, cost and insurance coverage and departments of health and safety concerns around nuclear medicine. But you're really speaking my language. I love to hear what you're saying about democratizing access to this care. And, you talked about reducing time toxicity for patients, for travel. In one of our previous episodes, we talked about climate change in cancer and how patients having to travel a long way to get cancer care was actually, contributing to climate change, right, through pollution. And so all of this really makes sense about being a patient-centered and also kind of good for everybody goal. So thank you for embarking on that and for sharing the story with us.
WiseNetics turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
Before we get too far into it, can you explain to me what you mean by Theranostics in case anybody else like me doesn't quite know what that means?
Sure. The easiest way to think of that is kind of two words coming together, Thera, representing short for therapies, and ostics for diagnostics. So you're combining two things, diagnostics and therapeutics. So typically what happens is you have a diagnostic agent, which is low radiation, and that basically we do imaging with PET-CT. And based on what the findings are, if they're positive on that, the imaging unit, which is low radiation, can be removed and replaced with therapeutic unit. And I almost call it like a homing signal, where the therapeutic unit follows all the sites of disease that are identified on the scanning with the diagnostic agent and treats all of those cancers much more specifically rather than treating or damaging a lot of good tissues. So it's kind of a twofold things. A lot of times when people think of that phrase as a new phrase, it's not. If people have heard of iodine therapies, which has been from the 40s and 1940s and 50s, that's the old school Theranostics thing. But now it's actually in vogue because of Pluvicto, because if anybody watches NFL games, they probably have seen ads for Pluvicto. A lot of times people wonder what that is, and that's what it is. It's being brought to forefront again with newer imaging agents and newer therapeutic agents.
So is Pluvicto the lutetium-177?
Well, lutetium-177 PSMA. So it's actually lutetium-177 is a therapeutic unit, and it can be attached to any ligand. So for example, in prostate cancer, obviously, as we know, PSMA are upregulated anywhere from 100 to 1,000%. So we're taking advantage of that and linking it with that PSMA, specifically targeting for prostate cancer. Similarly, there's another lutetium-177 that actually targets carcinoids, which prevalence is less, but it was actually first approved in the US compared to Pluvicto, where it's linked to somatostatin receptors type 2, which are significantly upregulated in carcinoids. So it links with that and it treats with that. So the ligand part can be replaced, but the lutetium can stay there, and then you can target different kinds of cancers for different things as you molecularly you discover more things or more studies coming along.
Gotcha. Okay. So how long has Pluvicto been approved?
So it was approved in the US in March of 2022, but it's been available in Europe and Asia for much longer than that.
Okay. Gotcha. And so why don't you maybe tell us a little bit more about what is the typical patient experience for Theranostics or for something like Pluvicto outside of your innovations?
So typically, when a patient gets diagnosed, so it's got a little more complicated now. The first when Pluvicto was approved in March of 2022, patient had to fail both androgen deprivation therapy and chemotherapy. So typically when the patients came to see me in a hospital or in a private setting, it was kind of near the end of the treatment cycles where they had failed multiple or treatment modalities. So the efficacy was not as great. Even then it showed great effectiveness. But starting March of this year, actually, the indication has changed where actually Pluvicto can be given pre-chemotherapy. And so it shows, where actually we should more effective since we're giving it much earlier. And there are even trials right now going on to make it even first line. So to even more benefit the patient upfront in terms of efficacy, in terms of treatment, prolonging life, and overall survival for the patient as well.
And how many treatments does a person typically get? Is it a one-time treatment?
Yeah, so it's actually the way I always explain to the patient is the word 6 and 6. It's 6 treatments every 6 weeks. So for a total of about 9 months, you'll be undergoing this treatment.
Okay, gotcha. 6 treatments every 6 weeks. And is a usual treatment, I would imagine, a pretty quick operation, an infusion?
Correct. Yeah. So the other ones that I mentioned before, carcinoid takes much longer. That can be anywhere from 4 to 5 hours total, not because of the radioactive therapeutic agent, but the other things linked to it for protecting the kidneys, like amino acids. But for Pluvicto, it's a rather in and out procedure, typically in and out in about half an hour.
Gotcha. And, since it's been approved in the U.S. in the last few years, would you say this is something that is available at most cancer treatment centers, or is it something that is still kind of reserved to, your sort of academic or high volume centers?
We're trying to find more inroads into it, but it was typically initially was more of the bastion of major academic centers, but slowly it's kind of percolating into the community. And as part of, the Society of Nuclear Medicine, being a co-chair of their community-based nuclear medicine, we're trying to bring this out to more and more different settings, private practices, smaller community hospitals. So this way the patient doesn't have to travel very far, but that requires you to have a proper staffing, proper infrastructure to be able to undertake all of that. So as Daniel mentioned earlier, the cost kind of scares people away. Staffing will and basically not only nuclear techs, but physicians who can undertake all of that. So getting all of that kind of milieu together is not always easy outside of the academic centers.
And if I may just add to that for a second, when we were designing the company and I was talking to the Department of Health, one of the talking points was how was it possible that only a handful of facilities in the state of Texas was providing this therapy, even though it's been shown to be very life-prolonging and life-saving. When we were designing the company, only 7 centers in all of Texas provided Pluvicto treatment, a radioligand treatment, amongst all the facilities that are currently here. Even amongst the major medical centers, they're limited to the amount of medications that they could get, the amount of patients that they could treat. The biggest center down here being MD Anderson, but they're capped at just a certain number of patients. There's a long waiting list of patients that need to be treated that will have to get traditional therapy, chemotherapy, radiation, chemo, that they could have started with Pluvicto. And then if Pluvicto failed, they could have did the other treatments. But because of the fact that it's so few and far in between, these institutions just don't have the wherewithal to get licensed. The staffing, as Dr. Abraham said, the infrastructure put together. So as of now, there's only about they've gotten to 11 sites in Texas.
Okay. Well, Texas is big. We all know that. So that doesn't sound like very many sites to treat all of the people in Texas who might need it. So what is your understanding of the capacity limitation in medical centers? Is it the drug, or is it maybe some of these barriers like regulatory and kind of like safety measures being upheld?
So from my research, what I've been seeing when I'm talking to different facilities, different individuals in the C-suites, it's more regulatory more than the medication. The medication, if they need it, they could get it. It's more the fact that they don't have the right individuals that's trained to provide therapy.
So sort of a staffing shortage, and they don't have the human capacity of the people.
The human capacity, the specialty, the nuclear technologists, the nuclear medicine physicians that's trained in Theranostics, that's where the limitations lie.
So then I guess that's kind of what leads a person to think, well, maybe if we can centralize all of these skills and the regulatory work into a mobile unit, we can go to the people rather than having them come to the places.
Exactly.
The other benefit also is, typically, unless you're in one major academic centers, even major academic centers won't have enough volume to support all the staffing infrastructure. So the mobile therapeutic allows us to go across to different practices to treat all of their patients while at the same time being practice agnostic. So typically, when you're in major competitive areas, people don't like to share information like practices or hospitals, but we go as a kind of completely practice agnostic. We're there just to treat the patient and provide you that service, and then we go to the next practice. So that gives us more kind of a breathing space in terms of being able to use all of our resources to get to these places and not just be dependent on one practice.
Mm-hmm. And forgive my ignorance here, but as part of your 6 week, 6 times 6 week treatment protocol, are you looking at things like surveillance imaging or follow up imaging or any other testing for the patients before they come back for their next treatments, or is it kind of a prescribed course of treatment no matter what?
Yeah, no, definitely we keep a very close eye on their blood counts because that's the number one side effect is hematologic. So we obviously will do lab work on them every couple of weeks as they're going through the whole cycles to make sure they're in the range that we want to be able to treat, and also their renal function, their hepatic function, and so forth. And when it comes to imaging, there are places that can do something called a SPECT CT imaging after each treatment to see where the disease is getting localized with basically where the radioactive treatments have been given, or in mid-cycle, you can actually do a PET CT, PSMA PET CT to see if the patient is responding, in addition to following their PSAs as well. So there's multiple ways we kind of make sure that the patient is appropriately responding, because obviously we don't want to treat something where it's not really responding. So we keep an eye on all of these things closely, all the lab parameters, all of their imaging, to make sure we're on the right track, benefiting the patients in terms of their care.
So I was wondering about what were some of the common side effects that patients experience when they're getting this treatment. So you said hematologic side effects, bone marrow suppression, I guess, and kidney failure. Anything else that's common in terms of treatment side effects?
Yep. One of the most common ones is they get dry mouth. So that's a very common thing. And I almost call it in some ways, when I'm discussing these in my consultation with the patient, there's a lot of side effects other than the ones we discussed. I call it chemo light. And what I mean by that is hematologic, there are obviously effects, but typically it's less than what I've seen in the past with chemotherapy. And same thing with things like fatigue, anemia, or hair loss, much less than what you would see, dyspnea, much less what you see with chemo. And part of that is because it's specific, right? It's actually specifically treating where the cancer cells are. So we're able to achieve that in terms of having a little less side effect than what you would typically see with the other chemotherapeutics.
And I'm curious if your mobile treatment centers offer some of this testing capacity, or are you relying on local laboratories and other imaging centers that the patients are normally going to outside of your treatment centers?
So right now, we are not providing any type of diagnostic tools for the practice that we're going to be interacting with. It's not to say that we're not going to add it on as a service. We intend to add on a mobile PET CT in the future, but right now our goal really is to provide the treatment, and then the diagnostic side will come in the not so distant future.
So you're having to kind of rely on people using whatever laboratory and other services they're typically using and where they're used to going?
Yeah, so a lot of the facilities that we're going to interact with and provide services to is going to be medical centers, community hospitals, and a lot of them already have a PET-CT suite within their nuclear laboratories, so they'll be able to utilize their own facilities. And the ones that don't, they all kind of have a relationship with outside radiology centers that provide the service.
Okay, so you're not inserting extra diagnostics there. Well, that makes me think, of course, as someone who's had to beg for records and read through stacks of records. Have you had any issues getting the test results that you need? Are you able to get those pretty easily? Do you have patients print them and bring them to you, or is there pretty good kind of interoperability of the electronic health records? Or
for the services that we're going to be providing is going to be as a fee for service, where we're going to be going into facilities where we're going to be utilizing their infrastructure. We're going to be an extension of each one of these facilities. Say Hospital X, we're going to be a department within Hospital X.
I see. Okay.
So it's going to be a seamless integration into their EMR system. So we will have access to each of these diagnostic reports, as well as the laboratory reports, because we're going to be integrating within their EMR so we could do our notes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Now, have you treated any patients yet in your mobile unit?
No, we are just about to start.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's exciting. Do you have the mobile treatment centers done? Are they developed? Can you tell us what they are like?
So they are Class A RVs that's gutted out and retrofitted to be a mobile nuclear laboratory. So they're lead lined with a full hot lab, injection chairs. That's just on 6 wheels.
How many chairs will be inside? How many people will be able to get treatment at one time?
Technically 2, but we're just going to start with 1 patient at a time. But we do have the capacity to see 2 patients at a time.
Start small. Yeah. Okay. And it's a pretty short infusion, like you said. So that doesn't mean you wouldn't be able to treat multiple people in each visit.
Exactly. And each one of these facilities that we're going to be providing services to, they're not going to have a lot of patients that qualify for this type of treatment at any one time. So treating the volume is not going to be an issue especially in the very near term.
So that brings me to something else, which I was thinking about. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about mobile healthcare when it comes to lung cancer screening. So this is, of course, a little different than that. But I think you've already talked about lots of obstacles you've had to overcome. But one of them is sort of the logistics of where do you go? How do you know when to go there? How often do you go there? How do you decide where to go? Can you tell us a little bit how you've been planning that?
Yeah, so we're working directly with an AI developer to create a scheduling platform that's going to tell us exactly, especially as we scale up and we're not seeing 1 or 2 patients and we're seeing many patients in a given month in various parts of the treatment cycle. We need to keep a very, very close eye on how we schedule each one of these individuals that way nobody falls through the cracks. So we're working directly to create an AI platform that's going to be specific to our needs and our scheduling dynamics to incorporate new patients coming in, patients that's already on the treatment cycle in various parts of the treatment cycle, and accommodating patients that's going to be coming off the treatment cycle. Where's the buses going to be? Because we're going to have multiple buses. How do we optimize the bus to the location and the providers that's going to be on the bus? Because each bus is going to have a nuclear medicine physician, a nuclear technologist, and possibly a PA or a paramedic.
And those last 2 folks you mentioned, a PA and a paramedic, would be for just any unexpected emergency medical.
Right. Exactly. Because you never know.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you now, because for years I've been envisioning having a mobile CT scanner and me and my chest radiologist that I work closely with, and imagining us driving around the state, scanning people, me checking them in, him reading the scan. So it sounds like you're going to have, I'm sure that team's going to be very close, and they'll be driving around together, taking care of patients. So what measures are you taking to ensure consistent quality of the care and radiation safety in the different regions that you'll be working in?
So basically, our plan is to kind of emulate what we have had at other practices, like where my current practices. Basically, quality is paramount, so that stays near the top. And then for radiation safety, we follow all the requirements that are for federal, state, and local, because regulations for nuclear safety sometimes are global and national, but there's also local requirements also. So we're going to make sure all of them are followed, and everything will be driven through AI. And then there are other mechanisms also. For example, we have badges, we have rings also, where we can follow and track almost real time the exposure of the individuals who are involved in these therapies, whether it be nuclear tech, whether it be physicians. So we can kind of make sure their exposure is as low as reasonably achievable in terms of all the LRR principles, to making sure not only are we taking care of the patients, but we're also making sure our staff is safe and also providing the best care possible. So all of these will be followed in a kind of a systemic model. And so we can emulate these and kind of carry this over as we expand to more and more units. So we stay consistent across basically all the practices we'll have across Texas.
And are there any precautions that patients who are undergoing this treatment need to take when they leave the infusion center to avoid exposure to anybody else?
Yep. So definitely. So that's part of when I do the consultation with the patient, I kind of describe it as kind of the do's and don'ts, and the precautions, they're more stringent precautions are for the first 3 days, and then a little more or less for the next 3-4 days, typically for a total of 7 days. But most of the stringent instruction are for the first 3 days. And because the radioactivity is leaving your body, so I always say radioactivity effects decreases with time because it's decaying away, and also with distance. So it does not preclude anybody staying in the same house or anything else like that. If you have children and everything else, it just have to be smart and kind of follow the instructions that are given. And that's why we spend a lot of time with the patients kind of going over the instructions with them, because patients might have, spouses, might have grandkids in the house, or anybody who's pregnant. So we want to make sure everybody is safe, not only the patient, but everywhere around them as well.
They're kind of in a little bubble, but not too big of a bubble. So, we talked a little bit about you're not quite off the ground yet, but what's next? Are there plans to expand beyond prostate cancer? Are you working on the next thing? Or are you still focusing on this one?
Yeah, no, that's our first is obviously getting the prostate Pluvictos off the ground, and then it's actually kind of venturing into other things that are actually in clinical trials right now, because this is just prostate. But there are also other cancers that have specific targets, both for imaging and therapeutics, that basically almost serves as a kind of a molecular fingerprints. So that can help us see the disease and then consequently kind of treat the disease. And I'll give you two brief examples. One is actually something called FOP, which stands for fibroblast activation protein. It's not really on the cancer cells themselves, but it's in the tissues that surrounds and feeds the tumor, kind of like the soil that's around the roots of a weed. And by targeting this FAP, we have FAPI imaging, which is fibroblast activation protein inhibitors. We can actually reach a wider range of solid tumors that were previously might have been hard to treat or even hard to kind of see on the scan. So if you can't see it, what are you treating? The second one is something called GRPR, which stands for gastrin-releasing peptide receptors, which are found at surfaces of several cancers, including prostate, breast, colon, and lung cancers in your field as well. So, but just by mentioning those four, I have kind of covered the vast majority of the cancer that are diagnosed in the US every year as defined by the American Cancer Societies. So basically, all of these kind of help target these things to first find the tumors and then to treat the tumors. So as they become subsequently available, we'll be going into these fields as well. The other thing we want to do is also is getting more into clinical trials, because typically, once again, the trials have been the bastion of the major academic centers, typically are not done outside of it. So once again, the patient has to travel all the way to major academic centers if they want to have access to these cutting edge therapies that might be in phase 3 trials. But by us, we can actually bring it closer to them where they are. And then basically their physicians who are the local places, they'll be able to offer this to them. So the patients, even doesn't matter where they are, they can get access to these therapies as well.
So if you're enjoying this episode of the Oncology Insights Podcast presented by WiseNetics, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. You can also set the notifications to on from our channel so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And please feel free to leave us your comments at any time. Your feedback is always valuable to us. We talked a little bit about AI and scheduling. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about how do you see artificial intelligence and molecular imaging advances supporting future applications of theranostics?
AI is what we see as more of a kind of a connected tissue that binds imaging, planning, and delivery of the treatments. So on the clinical side, I would say it'll help the patient selection in what we do manually every time right now, something called protocoling. So as we're developing newer agents that are becoming available and newer therapeutics, not every one will work for each patient. So the AI can actually go through EMR, go through all the old imaging and labs and kind of identify what is the best exam for the patient in terms of from the nuclear medicine PET-CT, then the field of view. And all of that can kind of lead to a segue where it can also help with pre-authorization. So last thing we want is a patient who are already undergoing all of these cancer treatments and all the stresses. Last thing is for them to have to worry about, is my exam covered or not? Same thing for the referring doc. They're so busy. So if we can help them along the process and all these pre-auths can be done automatically through AI between us and also the insurance companies, it'll make it one less thing they have to worry about. And in the mobile scheme, obviously, as I think Daniel mentioned in the past, you want the route to be optimized. So depending on where we're going, last thing you want to do is go to Austin for one treatment and the same day travel to Houston for the treatment. So if you can localize all the treatments in the Austin and surrounding areas on the same day, kind of leveraging AI, that would be the best use of our resources to do treatment in one area and then the next day move on to the next area. And lastly is kind of on the physics side is where actually AI can help segment tumors, so kind of segmentation. It can also give a dosimetry prediction. So basically, we're kind of giving personalized care in terms of a patient, in terms of what treatment dose is, rather than a one dose fits all for everybody. And then going back to radiation safety, it can kind of do exposure mapping over time of the staff that are involved and the patient. So we can make sure basically we're minimizing the radiation exposure to both the patients, their family, and also to the staff that are working with us.
That raises, thank you, some questions for me. One, I was wondering about insurance. You mentioned prior authorizations. Is Pluvicto covered by insurance pretty well now? And it sounds like it's considered pretty standard therapy. Can you speak to what that is like?
Yeah, sure. So so yes, it is covered by insurance, and obviously you have to get pre-auth. The biggest reason being how expensive the drug is. And slowly and surely, all the other insurance coming on board as well. Sometimes, obviously, you have to do peer-to-peer as well, like any other things. But it is covered. It has the proper A codes and everything else. It's just the due diligence for any internal or a hospital finance department to make sure that all the pre-auths are done with the pre-auth staff to make sure it's fully covered before they actually kind of get into the space.
And in this particular area, are there any barriers to this coverage for, when as a mobile infusion, or is there anything around the regulations about this that you think will be an extra barrier for you to face to do mobile infusions?
No, because the way it's designed is basically as Danny mentioned before, we're piggybacking off of work, joining and kind of collaborating these practices. So we're working with them. So it worked as a unit in terms of billing. So that's not an issue at all.
Okay. And yeah, the operational challenges, we've talked a little bit about the routes and the scheduling. How many of the buses or the RVs do you have? How many of the mobile units do you have?
Currently one, but we have 5 in plan for the next 24 months.
Okay. thinking about spreading 5 of them over Texas. And it feels like a fun problem to me to sit down with a calendar and a map. But like you said, AI is probably going to be a lot better at that than me.
Right. Because we are bound to make mistakes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm thinking about schedules and other large things I've made, and then
Last thing we want to do with a patient on a strict 6-week time schedule with on the treatment cycle for any one of them to fall between the cracks, between them not being able to come or us forgetting to show up. God forbid.
Right. Or having a problem, which I guess some of those things are unavoidable in terms of, a flat tire or a hurricane.
Exactly. For unforeseen God events.
Yeah. Yeah. That rises again, another question that came up on our climate change podcast topic, which was that large climate events interrupt cancer care. Right. So I think in a way, a mobile unit might have some advantages to that. If the hurricane's coming through this way, you make sure all your units are not parked there and then, reschedule people, I suppose. I assume that's something you're putting into your AI model as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, a little fun fact, the North Dallas Highway Association actually had a conversation with us through their 503C program, where they wanted to see if we were willing to work with them on a project to decrease highway use.
Wow.
Yeah. So by bringing care to the communities, we're decreasing highway use, highway accidents, highway incidences, and road wear and tear.
Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
By one unit going to the communities rather than many patients driving long distances.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Are you going to be pursuing that or still looking into it?
We're considering. We have a lot on our plate right now, so one hurdle at a time. But it was actually quite interesting to know that they even reached out to us for something that we didn't even think about.
So perhaps they learned about your project from the Department of Health, or is that what you think happened? How they found you?
I believe so. We're also, we've been invited to the Dallas Chamber of Commerce a few times. That we did some presentations and some panel talks. So I believe that they were, one of their representatives was probably there at the time.
Somebody was there and got excited about that. As we were talking about clinical trials and talking about, having patients not miss their 6-week scheduled visits, I'm wondering if you have any data about, through the current typical use, what the kind of retention is of people completing the prescribed treatment course. Is it pretty high? Is there a lot of attrition or loss through the course of treatment?
No, I mean, so far I've been very lucky in terms of all the patients. I've never had to discontinue treatment except in one patient, where the patient got really grade 4 toxicity. But all the other ones, I would say kind of the numbers are in the high 90s who actually complete all 6 cycles.
Okay. And I guess, in terms of some of the requirements that they have to use and the travel, or do any of those things seem to be barriers that ultimately cause people to not be able to complete their treatment course?
Not thus far, but there have been cases where patients have had where extreme fatigue. So we've had to delay a dose for a day or two, but nothing out of the ordinary where they didn't complete the treatments.
Up until recently, the patient demographics that Dr. Abraham has been dealing with were those individuals that were much sicker because Pluvicto treatment, radioligand treatment was delayed because of it wasn't the standard of care. So he was seeing much sicker patients that already went through chemotherapy, that went through radiation therapy, that don't have the wherewithal, the strength, or the physical capacity to have come for all the treatments for any of those individuals that may have fell off or had profound fatigue. But now that we're going to start seeing patients in a much earlier stage, we're going to be seeing much healthier patients within the disease process. So I think that we're going to be mitigating a lot of that pitfall by treating them earlier while they're stronger.
Yeah, I was just wondering if perhaps it was an issue of, from an implementation science, health services research perspective, if they have fewer barriers to treatment by coming into you coming to them, then maybe that will improve treatment completion.
Exactly. And that's why we're getting a lot of excitement from especially community hospitals and community medical centers that have to send their patients out. They'll diagnose them. They'll start the initial androgen suppression therapy, but then they all have to send them out to radiation oncologists or major medical centers that's providing various types of treatment. So we're getting a lot of excitement and buy-in from community hospitals and community medical centers because we're going to be giving them the ability to treat these individuals within their, let's call it their four walls, within their communities, earlier, faster, and when they're stronger within the disease process.
Do you anticipate offering other types of treatments in your mobile treatment centers? I mean, just kind of like IV fluids or blood transfusions or any of some of these other things that might happen for people whenever they come in for any kinds of infusions?
No.
Okay.
No.
They're going to be doing that through.
Yeah. We want to be very specific in what we're offering, what we're treating. We don't want to venture out and be. I don't want us to be a convenience store for various treatments. We have one focus, and that's radioligand therapy. And our second focus is going to be the diagnostics to that when the time comes with PET-CT.
And the other thing is also, as we are partnering with other practices that might have these services built in themselves, so we don't want to duplicate these things, whether it be through their practice or a hospital.
Right. Okay. What else? Is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you wanted to make sure that we tell people about?
What I would say is I think you have covered it pretty well, in all the areas, but we are excited to kind of bring this to the forefront, where it's more kind of been in the background, but to kind of tell the patients, this service is available. A lot of times it's educating not only the patients, but the referring physicians as well as to when is it appropriate to give the patient this therapy. So as Danny mentioned, we've been doing marketing, including different prostate cancer walks to get the word out so the patients see and get educated and kind of expand their knowledge base to kind of all of these things that are available to them, and go out to their physicians and ask them, hey, what about this? Because the best kind of patients are the educated patients who are actually taking active participation in their care. And that's where we're hoping to kind of work collaboratively with our patients as a center of care, working with the referring physicians, whether it be oncology or urology, for the purposes of prostate cancer. But we want to collaborate with all the other specialties as well, including pulmonologists when it comes down to when we start having cancer therapies for lung cancer and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it is so important, right? It's exciting that in oncology, we have so many new treatments. I mean, treatments are exploding, more personalized treatments, better tolerated, more effective treatments. But that really leads to an overwhelming amount of stuff to keep up with for an oncologist to provide all of their patients with top-notch care. So you're right. The education and the community outreach and the patient advocacy components are really important to your success and also to the success of these patients getting their cancers treated.
And I'll add one more thing, they actually, there's a lot of active research going on. So actually, they have already shown studies where when you're combining radioligand therapy such as Pluvicto with androgen deprivation therapy, or combining radioligand therapy with kind of radiation therapy, localized SPRT, they're showing synergistic effects. And similarly, there are other trials going on combining with chemotherapy. So there's a lot more information coming, and that's why part of the thing what I do when I report on the PET-CTs, when I'm reading a PSMA PET-CT, I'll put down hey, this patient has progressed, consider Pluvicto therapy. This way it brings it to the forefront for the referring physician. Oh, something for me to consider, because obviously they're very busy, and not just our space, their space is also preoccupied with all this latest and greatest things coming. So it's often very hard to keep up with all the things that are going on. So as much as we can help each other, our colleagues through team boards, everything else, the different talks, to kind of synergistically work to basically make sure the patient has access to all the care, all the therapies that would benefit them. That would be the ideal solution.
And we empowered our communications team to pretty much do a media blitz where we're going to be going out to various communities, not to the community hospitals or medical centers, but specifically to the communities themselves, assisted care facilities, veterans associations, churches, wherever there's a high prevalence of cancer, we want to go out to their communities and teach the community itself. Bring the education right to the people. Let them know what to look for. What's the importance of early diagnosis? What can you ask your provider? And let's teach you to be your own advocate. Because there's going to be a lot of facilities that they go to that they may not know of radioligand therapy. They may only know that, hey, you have cancer. The only thing we could do is chemotherapy. So this is what we're going to do for you. But let the patients be empowered with some knowledge to know that they can be their own advocate.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I agree. I wish you all the best of luck with that. It's hard work, but it's really important. Okay. Well, I think with that, we have our final three questions. So I'll ask these and then we'll wrap up. What, both of you, feel free to weigh in on this. What is your favorite oncology related book or resource?
For me, it actually is our Society of Nuclear Medicine Molecular Imaging, their AUC, which stands for Appropriate Use Criteria. So obviously we're developing more and more on each one, and we have for therapies as well. So that's our go-to resource in terms of looking that up. And similarly, we have IEA for radiation safety and European Association. And then we can't forget, a lot of times, what the information comes from our colleagues is actually a very good resource. So we might see something on our place, but across the different places across the country, people see different case mix indices. So I always leverage my colleagues, and they leverage me in terms of hey, have you seen this? So in addition to the papers and our societies, we kind of have a very good network. We kind of bounce ideas off each other to basically come up with the right solution for the right situation we might be in.
As far as a resource, it would be. I'm just going to piggyback on Dr. What Abraham said. It's let's go back to what our societies, our nuclear medicine society, our oncology societies, what is their standard of care? What is the literature that they put out? And we really should be bound to that.
And I'll start with you on this one, Danny. What is your favorite book or resource outside of oncology?
Oh, outside of oncology, this is going to be an easy one, actually. My favorite book that kind of defines me, that kind of defines the way that I approach life is 10X is Easier Than 2X by Dan Sullivan.
Oh, all right. Okay. I haven't read that. I'll have to.
It's actually amazing. It helps you to think differently. It helps you to overcome fears of the what if, because so many of us, we achieve a lot of our goals, a lot of the aspirations that we initially put forward, and we become complacent. We ride the coattails of our past achievements. But what drives us to the next? What helps us to build a legacy? What helps us to build something much bigger than us? So we have to, that book helps us it helps guide me to completely restructure my frame of thought of saying, all right, this is what I've done in New York. I built a mobile cardiology practice, and it was fairly successful. But it's only taken me to a certain level, and I hit a brick wall. I could have just ridden this brick up to this brick wall and just coasted. Because of regulations, because of certain things, I was not going to grow any further. Even though I might put more time, more effort, more money, it wasn't really going to be a huge incremental increase. So I had to, and thanks to Dr. Abraham, I was able to restructure my brain and my goals to something much, much, much bigger. And it turned out that this is 10 times greater effort, 10 times greater time investment, but the payoff could be several folds on top of that.
This is you in your 10X era, huh?
This is me in my 10X era. Thank you, Dan Sullivan.
Dr. Abraham, do you have any book or resource outside of oncology that you love and want to recommend?
Interesting. I'll pick the same book, but I come to it from a little different and some similar perspectives, the way Danny comes to it. Like what I came out of this book was like, realizing time is important and it's limited. So we need to prioritize what truly matters and to create champions based on expertise of individual. Don't think you can do everything. If you have identified an individual who's expert in that area, leverage that, delegate that. Focus on quality, not quantity. Have purpose and goals, but also realize, it's an evolution. So these things will change over time. So plan and prepare for that.
Well, I feel like we should end there because those are some really inspirational words from both of you. I feel like I just left a coaching or a mentoring session myself, so I hope our listeners feel the same way. I would say that concludes another episode of the Oncology Insights Podcast presented by Wisenetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback is so valuable to us. Until next time, this is Dr. Abby B. from the Oncology Insights Podcast, signing off.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Abby.